Och vi börjar med Johanna Gibbons. So Johanna Gibbons is a landscape architect and the founding member of J&L Gibbons. She co-creates with entire communities and with artists like Tracy Emin. You could say that the ability to bring life and growth and green into the city is second nature to her. She says, let's be eco-centric instead of egocentric. Yes, let's. Please welcome Johanna Gibbons. Johanna Gibbons.
Well, good afternoon. What a privilege to be here. Thank you. I've called this talk Deep Ecology. It's inspired by a Norwegian philosopher called Arne Lintner Næss, who introduced the phrase in the 1970s. Deep was to stress the need to ask how and why, and to promote a philosophical basis to the spontaneous experience of reality, the interrelatedness, a perception of the whole. And the image that I've chosen here, of course, for any microbiologist is mycelium, because watch out, the mycelium revolution is upon us. It's the most beautiful multicellular structure that is going to be the future of biofabrication. And this photograph still takes my breath away. I first saw it at school when I was 8 years old. And I remember the power of this image. It was the first time any of us had seen the beautiful blue planet from afar over the barrenness of the moon. And last night was the supermoon, which was quite interesting to think about, the supermoon being that wonderful moment where we celebrate the beginning of spring. I think it's no less stunning today. And, you know, that notion of going to explore the moon and actually discovering the Earth is very poignant in the fact that we need to be terribly open-minded. We are our world. And this photograph actually started the whole environmental movement back in the 60s. And here we are on the edge of a planetary ecosystem collapse 50 years later. So, as was said in the introduction, we need, what's missing from this beautiful piece of art is mankind. Because right now, we need to consider ourselves as part of the ecosystem, not separate. We need polymath scholarship, in my view, and action, and consider every part of nature on an equal basis. And contemporary with that beautiful picture was this seminal book by my professor's professor, Ian McHarg, who's one of my many heroes. And this book was incredibly important and has just again celebrated its 50th anniversary. So half a century on, we are revisiting this book, or some people don't even know it exists, in terms of understanding the complex interdependencies that are critical to understand if we are to co-create, not just co-create with each other, but co-create with nature, to redesign, to redefine what nature is, especially in our urban cities. And design with nature, in my view, is absolutely fundamental way of practice. So we are in the Anthropocene, as what has been said before. Most of our soils in the city are anthropogenic. They're sterile and compacted. And what we need to do is understand the preciousness of this, This is compost. It is the most miraculous thing where you put your waste in a bin and it turns into fertile soil. And this soil that covers our earth, a delicate skin, is biodiverse and it's sensual and it's also vulnerable, and we need to protect it. There is no protective legislation in the UK for soils, and we have perhaps only 40 harvests left before we turn into an Easter Island. It's vital to understand natural systems, natural processes. That's where you start. How can you make a proposition if you don't understand what you're going to disrupt? How can you make a proposition in terms of design if you don't appreciate how you can repair and work with nature to make a meaningful vision for the future? Working to a deeper premise in this climatic and biodiversity crisis. So that was by way of an introduction. My practice is now 35 years old, and it's very much to do with the integration of practice and research. These are fused activities, and one doesn't really exist without the other, partly because we don't have the time to practice, sort of do a review of what has been achieved or not, make modifications, and then learn from that. We need to rapid prototype the system of learning and acting. So we realize far-reaching ideas that are strategic, they're to do with restoration, regeneration, heritage, education, and they're all through collaborative practice. As landscape architects, we know no other way. We work across the arts, the sciences, and the humanities, and it's a very rich and a very fulfilling practice. Our current work reflects key concerns of climate change, biodiversity, and mental well-being. And we have 3 museums currently on the drawing board and on site, which is the Natural History Museum in London, the Museum of London, and very exciting to be involved in the Munch Museum Island in Oslo. So as I said, we rapid prototype research ideas into practice, and there are maybe 3 key areas of what we term critical infrastructure. And I'm not talking about roads or railways or sewage. I'm talking about trees, soil, and water. We see the city as a landscape that forms part of a wider catchment where upstream thinking is vital in terms of land and water management, to be neighborly to those who live and work downstream, but also to mimic natural hydrological cycles. We authored the first sustainable urban drainage strategy for Transport for London to help prevent this. And this isn't happening 1 in 100 years. This is happening every weekend in the past month. We've had more rainfall in February in England than has ever been recorded before. And we're still trying to build bigger, harder engineering solutions rather than looking in the upper catchment at how we can mitigate, how we can slow the flow, how we can promote porosity, how we can depave and plant. And planting happens naturally, of course, and there is, self-seeding is not a dirty word. It's the most extraordinary thing when trees self-germinate, because in doing that, we maintain a wide genetic diversity. And just because it happens naturally doesn't mean it's of lesser importance. The Woodland Trust have recently made much comment on this, that we need to protect the self-seeded regeneration of woodlands as much as our veteran forests. And the urban forest, which is something that I feel so passionate about, it comprises all the trees in a city as one resource, the seedlings, the veteran trees, and this creates a really significant carbon store and wildlife haven. Within this, you get carbon sequestration, you get biodiversity, you get attenuation of heavy rainfall, you get good air. This forest structure is creating high quality air. And even so-called deadwood is alive. It's a resource an urban forest that requires stewardship. So this doesn't just happen. These forests all over the world have been managed by man, and they need to be protected and managed and expanded. We simply can't afford to live in a city or a world without trees. And the urban forest is a deep reflection also of our cultural values rooted in the community, and our social enterprise, Landscape Learn, seeks to reconnect urban communities with the natural heritage of the city and with natural systems. So what we simply want to do is take people to these places, which is maybe a bit scruffy, maybe they're self-seeded, maybe they're backland sites, but they have an urban ecology that actually, ironically, is far more interesting and diverse than a lot of our greenfield sites or our green belt. So I just briefly want to touch on two projects. The first one is Making Space in Dalston. And this was, it's a public realm project. It was part of realizing this mayoral initiative, which is the All London Green Grid, a wonderful, it was a wonderful project setting the armature for all green infrastructure in London, where all the borough boundaries were dropped away and you could see the city as a landscape. And of course, it was a lot about urban ecology, about these anthropogenic soils and ruderal vegetation, which is no less important than other habitats. And what we wanted to do was evidence the beauty and the importance, ecological value of those urban habitats as an interconnected part of the flora, the fauna, and humanity of the neighborhood. In doing this, as I said, we collaborate with many wonderful people. In this project, it was MUF and with Exist, and a genuine collaboration is always challenging. It's a lot of the time uncomfortable and frustrating, but it's hugely rewarding given stamina. And so out of this process, because this project really was a process to do with managing a community that was in deep rage and a major conflict about the regeneration program that was happening around it. And so our first step was to step back, if you like, and appreciate the whole, understand all the existing assets, and to listen and nurture what might be possible before redefining what the projects were. And this process is not linear, and we know that from our everyday lives. It's one that loops round in a consistent loop that consistently gives feedback so that you can fine-tune propositions. And we did that in community spaces. We brought our client, our multi-headed client, to community spaces, which we hired from the community, in order that there was a sense of comfort and relaxed conversation. And that community then felt confident enough to bring forward a whole range of different opportunities that we then framed up in terms of mayoral initiatives. So rather than traditional park making, it was a powerful notion of positive discontinuities, which together created the potential for delivery, not grandiose, but attuned to people and place, and something that felt meaningful to the people who were spending their time with us. And we were asked to bring forward for Design for London, who was one of our clients then, 10 projects, 10 public realm projects. And in fact, there was such a lot of energy in our stakeholder groups that we evolved 76 projects, and we put those into 10 themes, and one being the Dalston Eastern Curve. And this really became the flagship for the whole initiative, where rapid prototyping, governance structures, and concept design and process worked in parallel, because there is a very irresponsible thing to produce something that can't be maintained into the long term. So we wanted to look at who was interested in being involved to ensure that the project was sustainable. And along the way, we were opportunistic. And so when approached by the Barbican, who sought external partners for an artist intervention, the Dalston Mill emerged with Exeast and Agnes Dennis as a wheat field in the middle of Dalston. And what that proved was that change could be positive, that there was a way of looking at planning in a light which would be beneficial to the community. So we sought to unlock and reveal and celebrate what had been overlooked for a long time. Through engagement, we made apprenticeships, and the social capital that generated making the bread in the Dalston Mill was then reinvested to raise a barn. And this was in a landscape considered a wasteland, but to us had an extraordinary natural beauty, if you like, which and enormous resilience. The process of realizing these projects are often complex, and it reveals many past histories of abuse and disregard. So that previous era was swiftly adapted in collaboration with our soil scientists and in terms of generating a soil resource that could be engineered to establish a pioneer woodland, to embrace the barn and create a sanctuary, an environment for growing and nurturing the local community. And at this point, our project, in a sense, was finished, but we always know that that's the point where a project starts. And 10 years on, it's rare that we're in a position to be able to help a community to reflect, and for that to be a provocation for the Mayor of London. Is this what you meant? Is this what you meant by localism? Because if it is, there were certain critical aspects of the process that you should think again on. And as real estate in London becomes more and more valuable, we find ourselves now as friends of the social enterprise that runs the garden, helping them to save it from development. And so what started as a garden has turned into a cultural hub of international profile, with 150 visitors coming through the door within this urban forest, which is only 10 years old, and a thriving social enterprise. So part of this is to actually define for the planning department all the currencies of value other than monetary. And those currencies were given to us and made evident by people who came to the garden at a rally that we organized. And that, alongside some research we're doing into how urban environments affect well-being, provided the evidence on which a whole process, a planning process, was stopped to start again and to recognize the essential value of this tiny place. The second project is completely different, and it's in Oslo, and for which we built a Norwegian team, which has been very exciting, so that we didn't have to travel so much, and we could, the everyday could be handled by that team. And Munch is a very interesting artist, a fabulous artist, who had a tussle with a sort of tortuous relationship with nature, where he said nature is not is not only that which is visible to the eye, it also includes the inner pictures of the soul. And Tracey Emin was commissioned, well, through competition, to create a bold new landmark dedicated to him. And this feminist piece is going to sit rather poignantly against the rather masculine outline of the architecture of the museum, in my view. And we are charged with creating the setting for this amazing bronze, which will sit on an island out in the Oslo fjord. And in considering our approach to this, we were inspired by the extraordinary diverse coastal ecologies of Norway. And the idea was to create a seedbed. I mean, the bronze itself is Tracey Emin's mother kneeling pregnant with her. So it's a very feminist piece that considers fertility, vulnerability, strength. It's going to be, I think, pretty stunning. And so what we wanted to do was also think about bringing biodiversity to the heart of the city, to a place which in ecological terms is a desert, and celebrate the fertility, celebrate the local provenance of the ecologies that are sitting around on the islands that surround Oslo. And we were inspired by the traditional low-tech approach to nature as architectural structure, and wanted to create a sort of an illusion of the natural flow and ebb of the ocean in a meadow, articulated as if drawn by coastal processes rather than by design. And then working closely with Tracey Emin and the architects, Studio Herreros, as to the setting and scale. And I think it's rather amusing that actually the sculpture almost post-rationalizes the architectural intent. And it's an interesting one because scale in this city is being blown open by the scale of the regeneration along the waterfront. So this is going to be a very intimate piece. It will mirror the pattern of underlying geology of the Oslo fjord. It will establish a soft landing. It will make porous what has been given to us, which is a solid concrete structure, so philosophically and literally. And we are collaborating with botanists in the Oslo fjord, collecting local provenance seeds and advance procuring them to bring them to the island. And in time, this will become the seedbed for other projects in Oslo. Also drawing on the natural and artistic heritage, beautifully documented in this book called Norsk Flora of 1948, which is the Bible for Norwegian botanists. And again, our Landscape Learn social enterprise we use to draw in potential interested partners from all the natural sciences, from the universities that surround Oslo, and through collaboration with this scientific community, we are discussing and integrating the potential of groundbreaking research into urban bee pollination. And the engaging of these stakeholders is not something that is a bore. It's an absolute fundamental part of enriching what we do. And Landscape Learn is a useful vehicle to enable this collaboration to come to fruition. And we hope that within the museum, the interpretation and the understanding of this dynamic landscape that's going to be sitting on the doorstep will be something that will be celebrated in the shop in terms of the flowering seasons, making it clear that this is not a meadow that is just to do with having a picnic in. This is a meadow that reflects the fundamental geology and dynamic of the Oslo fjord. So, as a landscape architect, I believe the profession can be part of the solution to the climate and biodiversity emergency. And I feel very energized to get out there and to communicate strategically and imaginatively a new form of city making, a new form of habitat creation or co-creation with nature. And there's a lot of interesting initiatives going on in London. The one in the middle here is conceiving London as a national park city, which you might think is a mad concept, but it's a brilliant concept because everyone can get involved in what that means. It's, if you like, it's just a vehicle for exploring as many different ideas as possible and discussing them through festivals and through work on the ground, through farming, through creating opportunities for doorstep assets and biodiversity, as well as large parkland projects. And I believe we must start at home with our own habits, with our own way of living. And this is mine, a big ghost sign that's gone up on the side of my house, in a language I hope that is clear and persuasive and engaging, as well as sharing knowledge and networks generously with those in our sphere of influence. And we're fostering from our studio culture to show what can be done. So when any client comes into the studio, we have disconnected downpipes, we have a mini arboretum, we demonstrate porosity, diversity, and hopefully that supports well-being and creativity, as well as advocating on the street for incidental urban nature. This is collaborating with Siobhan Davis Dance Studio, a sort of choreography of city habitat. So deep ecology is motivated by a love of nature as well as for humans. And I believe our collective efforts of co-creation, cross-sector, cross-disciplinary, to prevent planetary ecosystem collapse is possible through action and redesign with nature, with vision. Tack.